This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to episode 132 of the Inktofilm podcast, where we read the book
And then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week, we discuss Peter Jackson's 2003 film, The Return of the King. This is it, Luke. Everything's been building to this.
This is it.
This is our final chapter of Middle-earth for at least the foreseeable future. You know, we might do The Hobbit at some point, but this is the closing the book on all of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and The Hobbit will be a dessert at this point, you know, following the main course, which this definitely was. I was looking back, and we published our first episode on the Fellowship of the Ring on April 12th of 2018. Today, recording, it is the 14th of April, so we are 2 years and 2 days after our first published episode, which we probably recorded 2 days prior. It's very close. To a 2-year journey we've been on from the Shire all the way to Mount Doom and back again now. So yeah, here it is. And man, what a movie. I have a lot of observations. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm excited to get into it.
We talked about it in past episodes, but this whole project has been kind of therapeutic for me.
Absolutely. And this is the movie I've seen the least number of times. So in many ways, it felt freshest to me watching it. So, you know, that was exciting. And even the extended version, I think I may have only seen once or twice prior to this.
Wow.
So a lot of it felt really new to me. I had a great time watching it. You know, I'm gonna have little quibbles here and there. I'm gonna have things I point out. I have some significant criticisms at times, but man, I had a great time watching this movie. And this is like our podcast at its best. You know, after spending all this time with the book. I was so hyped to watch it, and it just landed so well for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. The movies to me feel so familiar. Like it's just such a comfort thing for me to know that in the end we'll defeat Sauron and like go back to the Shire, and as much tragedy as there is throughout, the journey is worth it. And yeah, I mean this time didn't let me down on that front either. I guess since we're talking about it here, let's start digging into some of the general stuff before we talk filmmaker. And let's start by talking about this as a full 3-film trilogy, and then maybe break it down and start talking about how you feel about this in comparison to the other 2 films. Like where do you land with this film, and how does it strike you with this most recent viewing, having the backstory and the source material of the book to draw from?
So I'm going to get into that, but I want to give one shout out here to the listener because there's something looming that we've begun this year, and I've realized that we've never done it before for any Lord of the Rings project, and that is...
I was thinking about this too.
At the end of this episode, we're going to have to decide whether or not the book or the movie is better, and I think we're going to do it for the full trilogy. That was my plan.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not prepared, but I'll start thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to piecemeal. I think it's going to be one or the other. You know what I mean? I'm kind of dreading it. I have a lot to say. I'm dreading it, also looking forward to it. You know, it's a mix of emotions, but I wanted to put that out there to the listener to stick around to the end, because that's going to be an interesting pronouncement for us. And we're also going to go ahead and announce our next project. And you're going to hear that too. So with regards to what you said, how do I feel about this trilogy as a whole, this film as a whole? I think through the fullness of time, I can look back at this as truly a monumental moment in film, especially in like blockbuster cinema and especially fantasy cinema. Like we've gotten so many great works of fantasy that have come after these movies, and so much of it is predicated on the success of this. And people looking at it and going, well, I guess fantasy can do well. Because for the longest time, the knock on fantasy was that it just didn't do well for mainstream audiences.
Mainstream audiences became thirsty for fantasy. There's always been a pushing of genre to the borders for I think general audiences, but I think it legitimized fantasy in this kind of fantasy for a lot of just, general moviegoers and general, content consumers.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen this take going around, I think because a lot of people are revisiting this trilogy right now, and I'd be curious to pick your brain on this just off the cuff. I've been seeing people say that they prefer this trilogy of films to the original Star Wars trilogy, and that it's more important to them as a series of movies.
It's crazy to say. Like, I saw Star Wars first, so that was my first kind of fantasy sci-fi love, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But I think I agree. I think these mean more to me. I think as a trilogy, as much as massive of a Star Wars fan as I feel like I am, I think I just prefer Middle Earth to Star Wars, and it's not. I would say it edges it out, not by a lot.
Right. I'm hard pressed to choose too. The original trilogy, especially for me, just holds a special place. I saw it when I was so young, whereas I saw this a little later in life. Obviously it came out a little later in my life. Whereas I grew up on the Star Wars films. So yeah, I mean, I've never been a massive fanboy of either. You know what I mean? Like, I don't define myself by either like many people do. But yeah, if I had to choose, I might give it to this one, because I have criticisms of both. I don't unabashedly love everything about, the movies, either one. But the highs are maybe higher, in this trilogy, and just the emotional connection I have to it is maybe just that much stronger. And I've always felt like, I think the connection between Lord of the Rings and fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons has always been very important to me, because that's a game that I've played throughout my life. And I had the observation watching this movie that it's kind of like a sizzle reel for Dungeons and Dragons. So many people must have watched this movie and been like, "Oh yeah, I got to play some D&D after this." It does so much more than that, but I was feeling it this time for sure. Yeah,
I think that Empire Strikes Back is a near perfect sci-fi film, like in terms of like, especially when it came out. So like, I think the highs of Star Wars are rival for sure the highs, and for me the highs of the trilogy, this trilogy here of Lord of the Rings, I've talked about multiple times. My favorite part is Fellowship, and that's, and again, I think that the other parts maybe edge out Fellowship just barely, but the highs of Fellowship I would put right there. I would put Empire right there. Like, I think they're both near perfect for their genres.
And honestly, this would probably be its own podcast episode, just really debating this. I think I would need to watch them again, because I have the recency bias of like, I've seen these ones more recently. So, that's just my initial gut reaction, but it would be a fun debate to have and to actually watch all those movies and figure it out.
Yeah. And I understand why people are bringing it up, because it's always fun to like kind of poke and prod, but ultimately both are great. So, and that's barring sort of the Hobbit trilogy and the prequel trilogy or the sequel trilogy for Star Wars. So like, that's not even bringing in those details.
Yeah. There's all this extra stuff on both that kind of is pulling at it. Right. So I have actually some more observations about where this, not only the films, but the books too, where it all comes together in the zeitgeist and the legacy of Tolkien and the legacy of Peter Jackson's films. But I want to save those for the very end, because I'm going to use them when I'm talking about this debate of book versus movie. So if you're ready, I think I'd like to start hearing about some of this behind the scenes stuff you have.
Yeah, I think these are some of my favorite movies to dig into, because it's sort of these appendices, and I've talked about it before, the Fellowship really spurred my love of film, I feel. And I think that it was a huge stepping stone towards like how much I would love film and how I would want to be involved in it. And like, these appendices are literally the kind of your best look, especially back when they first came out on those the special edition DVDs when they came out. It was like nothing, there was stuff out there that was attainable, but like, I was pretty young, and so for me it was like the first time seeing like, this is how movies are made.
Yeah.
So revisiting those all the time is so much fun, and there's so much to this. I think people think of this trilogy and they're like, oh yeah, it's the same as any other movie. It's shot and then it comes out in theaters, and like, it's just such a different, it had never been done in this way, and it was 3 movies shot in a row, which also hadn't been done. And I think people are just like, oh yeah, Peter Jackson, he directed it, and it was this whole thing, and then it came out and it was a huge success. But like, all the people that were involved, and I think if you start to dig, people know about WETA Workshop, and they know about all these practical these practical locations and sort of sets that they built, which were all amazing. The costuming, we talked about it on all of the episodes, so I don't want to touch too much on some of these stuff. If you want to hear more about that, I'm sure we talked more in our Fellowship movie and our Two Towers movie episodes. But I found myself thinking a lot about Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens this time around. Watching, mostly because, and I think I did talk about this in past episodes, but they, along with Peter Jackson, were literally taking Tolkien's lore and his world and having to recreate it and change it and morph it in ways that would be serviceable to fans, like longtime fans and people who are new to it. And I mean, you know, I just have to go ahead and say this here, whether or not this makes you think that I, you know, prefer one over the other. I think that the way that they were able to intercut the stories absolutely changed this fundamentally changed Lord of the Rings, especially for that more modern audience, for so much the better. And it works so much better cinematically. And I was just thinking about how while they're filming Fellowship, while they're filming Two Towers, while they're, you know, they're in post-production, they're in pre-production for the following film, they're constantly rewriting. And it was just to think of all the hours that they spent with Peter Jackson after he got off set to write and sort of mold this and come out with something that I think is just like amazing, and the way that they were able to take moments and intercut them together. As I was reading the J.R.R. Tolkien books this time, I was realizing how much the intercutting helps this story.
You know, yeah, because we were talking about in the books that they separate out Frodo and Sam's story from the main story, and they kind of occur separate halves of the novel, which are literally called Book 5 and Book 6. If you haven't read the books,
right.
That's why. So yeah, what you're referring to, I agree. I think it's also partly something you have to do for this medium. It just works so much better this way. And I wanted to, since we're talking about the people writing this thing, I feel like I've given them a lot of shit for a lot of the humor that was added, because some of it doesn't land for me personally at times. But I was really thinking about how what I'm not doing is appreciating all the humor they added that does work. And there's a lot of it. There's a lot of great lines. There's a lot of moments with the hobbits that really work. There's a lot of even moments with Gimli and Legolas where it's not as cringy as some of the other stuff. And, you know, if your hit rate is 90%, and yet you still have 10% where people are cringing, or I am personally cringing, you know, I'm not going to speak for everybody, that's still pretty good. That's still a pretty good hit rate. And the fact that levity is inserted into this movie that honestly makes it not only more widely appealing, but is a nice moment of you know, being able to crack a smile and have a laugh in the middle of what is otherwise a pretty daunting film, as far as like a lot of really bad stuff happening all at once. They strike a good mix, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think it also leads to us sort of seeing the personality of the filmmakers come out too. Like we get to see sort of, you know, it's also how old at this point, like 20 years old, like the trilogy's near 20 years old, or the first movie's near 20 years old. So like, you know, maybe the humor doesn't hold up for those reasons, and maybe they were trying to, you know, go for a more general audience. I find myself in I talked about how I feel like I'm probably biased at the end of our last episode, but I find myself being pretty forgiving of a lot of things in this final film that I think I can remember people talking about it as it came out, and even after the fact. Just a lot of the things that people point to, I don't really have a huge issue with. You know, some of the humor, like you said, I think like you said at the beginning of the episode, a lot of it's just nitpicking for us.
Yeah.
Like I do enjoy near everything that happens in this, and some
I mean,
of the
if we're going to have a conversation about a movie that lasts over an hour, we're going to nitpick at least some. I think that's to be expected.
Yeah. Like I can remember one of the largest criticisms is sort of the CG and the way that they handled it in this film, and how, you know, it progressively got more and more CG intensive as the films went on. And, you know, I think that's clear. It's clear that like the technology was holding them back. But I think when they did CG for the most part, they always tried to do it from like a practical standpoint. And maybe that was just like kind of the technology of the time. But for the most part, like you said, maybe like I think there's about a 90% hit rate, and like that 10% is
it mostly holds up.
Yeah. And that's a feat 20 years later.
Yeah.
And even the ghosts, a lot of the things that I think people have problems with aren't the ghosts that are in the forefront, but sort of when they do these large sweeping composite shots that were like pretty ambitious for the time. They don't quite hold up. Those are the ones that tend to look kind of rough. And and some of the stuff with the Oliphants, and that brings me to another thing, is just like how under the gun they were for the entire time. Like I talked about how they're constantly shooting and then rewriting when they're not shooting. They shot principal photography for 14 months on all three of these movies together, so over a year and 2 months. And then for the intervening like 3 months, for the intervening like 3 years that would go on between the pre-production on the first movie to post-production on the third movie, they would go and do like 6-week pickup shots for each film and things like that. So I mean, it's such a crazy process, and they were so under the gun. And just to think about how many CG shots there were in this final film, and how, like, you know, everything, you know, if you're on the first movie, you can be like, oh, we'll push it. We have all this time. We'll just push that shot to the next day. We'll push that shot to the next day. But as you get closer to the end, everything starts to compound. And in the appendices, I was seeing that there were times when they were running like something like 10 units at the same time. So they had 10 different cameras rolling on 10 different scenes, all filming pickups and miniatures and just little inserts or like landscape views, things like that. Crazy to think that they wow. and all of that was being monitored by Peter Jackson and company, where, you know, everything that's being shot is through his vision and everything. So just crazy to think like what situation they were in with this, and sort of the CG team was in, and all that kind of stuff leading into this final movie. So a couple things. One, to touch on the undead. They're probably my least favorite part of this movie. I have a lot of criticisms. The way the CGI looked is a more minor criticism of them. I don't like a lot more about them, which I'll get into as we go. But for my taste, they do look a little bit Haunted Mansion for me. Reminds me of the Haunted Mansion ride at what is it, Disney? Yeah. And whenever I see them, they just seem kind of corny. Even though they don't look terrible. It's just something about that green, something about the way they're employed, and they fly through Aragorn at times. It just is a little silly. And like I said, CGI is not my main criticism of the dead. I have other story criticisms of the way they're employed. And then I think the worst CGI moment in the film, and it was pointed out in another video I watched by this YouTube channel, Corridor Crew, and once they highlighted it, I couldn't not see it. There's a moment where Frodo goes running into Mordor or into Mount Doom. I know exactly what you're talking about. He's on roller skates when he's running in. It looks so bizarre. Right. He's not connecting with the ground. And that, I mean, clearly, like you said, the reasons are there. They were under the gun. They didn't have enough time. I'm sure that's why that looks like that. But I think it's the worst moment of CGI in maybe all three films. Yeah, it's pretty rough. I saw, like, I feel like I've known that for a while. I feel like I've seen that shot many, many times. And then this time when I specifically saw it again and was like, God, that looks horrible. I think your eyes are supposed to be drawn to Mount Doom so much that you're not paying attention to him. But unfortunately, like once you've seen it a bunch, you start to key in on that. I will say that a lot of this stuff, I think a lot of the problems with CG, and I think that this is what filmmakers have realized over time, and I think Lord of the Rings was kind of putting their best foot forward and sort of starting to teach people about this, is CG is obviously best done when it's blended with practical. Like a mixture of the two is what creates sort of what I would say the most realistic 3-dimensional spaces and things like that. Sure. And so I think in trying to keep the undead somewhat practical, they ran into what you're talking about, sort of that Haunted Mansion look, because very clearly there were actors who acted those scenes and then they put sort of filters and CG over top of them that made them look kind of interesting. And I think I forgive that much more than I forgive sort of just like clunky, sort of no gravity, uncanny valley CG. You know what I mean? Like I think I prefer like sort of something from a practical standpoint than something that's like completely unrealistic. Well, and I want to say that a lot of it looks great, you know, so much of the CG in this movie looks great. I unless I have a, you know, background in this, I can't look at a scene and tell what is practical and what is CG sometimes. You know, sometimes it's so well blended. What's a miniature and what's a full size thing, you know, there's a lot of that. And, you know, for the most part, it looked great, you know, and I honestly don't want to harp on it because I think the special effects in general in this film across the board are astounding and something that is held up as one of the best examples of an amazing work from a CG team or a special effects team. Yeah, so you brought up miniatures, so I want to talk about that for a second. Just as kind of a factoid here, the principal photography of this film was 274 days, and just as like something to note, there's other crews that are doing things, but you have on this movie, Peter Jackson loves miniatures, so he was doing a lot with miniatures. In the appendices, they talk about the fact that the miniature department shot for 1,000 days. In comparison to the principal photography of the actual Lord of the Rings film was 274 days.
Wow.
Which is just like unbelievable to me.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. And specifically in the appendices for Return of the King, they talk a lot about Minas Tirith. They created a 1/72nd scale version of Minas Tirith. Mm-hmm. It was 7 meters tall and six and a half in diameter. Absolutely. So like, meters, I think that's somewhere around 21 feet high.
Yeah, that's it fills up a room. That's pretty wild.
Absolutely insane. And the level of detail in those miniatures, you can put them and use them as the backdrop in those shots as when they start to layer it, and it looks like it does in the movie. And I think that's something incredible, and something, again, that I think when you blend the two, I think it really looks amazing. But unless you have any other general stuff, I think we can jump into some of the plot stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already talked about Peter Jackson at length, right? I think in previous episodes, if I'm remembering correctly. So, yeah, I'm ready for it, man. Let's get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to touch more on him, but overall, I think we have talked about him a lot. I did want to note that sort of the leading up to the Paths of the Dead, that sort of corridor that they head into that's all foggy, is actually a shot. He reused that location in New Zealand for that shot. When he had previously used it on another of his films called Brain Dead.
Oh, wow.
So I just thought that was something interesting, that like he has such a love for New Zealand. And honestly, that's something else that we should touch on, is just the way WETA Digital and WETA in general, Special Effects Department, and New Zealand, the way that this film franchise affected that region and sort of started up their film careers and like really made them a top of the line production department. I think is something to be noted as well, and sort of getting to see all the people that Peter Jackson brought in to work with him, I think is some of the most fun that you can have while watching the appendices. Just seeing like friends that he worked with on early films and sort of like people who were kind of at the beginning of their careers and like sending them down to like become some of the greatest, special effects departments and things like that of all time. And it meant so much to the region in general. A lot of the stunt performers and a lot of the people in general that worked on the films were all native to that region, to New Zealand. So,
and the tourism that has exploded there because of Lord of the Rings is an ongoing gift that these films gave to that region. Like you said, like lots of people's livelihoods have been created or continue because of this franchise.
Yeah, which I think is just something really cool to note. Just seeing like something amazing like this film franchise and also having an added effect to kind of help out a region is really cool, in my opinion. But let's jump into this plot if you're ready.
I'm ready, man.
Okay, so we start off with Smeagol and Deagle are fishing when Deagle discovers the one ring in the river. Smeagol is ensnared by the ring and kills his friend for it. He retreats into the Misty Mountains as the ring twists his body and mind until he becomes the creature Gollum. Gandalf leads Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and King Theoden to Isengard, where they reunite with Merry and Pippin. Gandalf retrieves the defeated Saruman's Palantir. Pippin later looks into the Seeing Stone and is telepathically attacked by Sauron. From Pippin's description of his visions, Gandalf surmises that Sauron will attack Gondor's capital, Minas Tirith. He rides there to warn Gondor's steward, Denethor, taking Pippin with him.
And what a great way to start this movie. The backstory of Gollum as Smeagol, seeing Andy Serkis without his makeup on, although he has some other makeup on probably, but not the Gollum makeup. And it's such a interesting story. And it made me realize that Gollum doesn't get a lot of page time in the book for Return of the King. A lot of it happens in Two Towers. And instead, we're getting a lot of his story here in this film. And it just reminded me of how great a character Gollum is. And seeing the transformation and the way the ring immediately seizes on him, has him kill his friend, and the way he immediately... it's unknown, like how much of it is the ring twisting his mind, how much of it is Gollum having like a latent evil that is ignited by the ring, or latent greed, or what is it, And I don't think there's any way to know, but the way that they get entwined, and the idea of him over just many, many years physically transforming into this monster, It's just such a great way to start this movie and just really hooks you.
From what I understand, this scene was supposed to be placed somewhere in Two Towers, but within the edit, they realized that it didn't really fit. There wasn't a spot to flashback. So eventually Peter Jackson realized he wanted to just start this movie with it. And starting on that shot of the worm, like twisting and contorting around in Gollum's, or in Smeagol at this point's finger, I think he really enjoyed that. And I agree. I remember seeing this scene for the first time and being like, just so taken aback, knowing that like we were going to get the Gollum backstory, the Smeagol Gollum backstory. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the transformation is it's really awful to look at, like sort of in between the Smeagol and Gollum persona. Yeah. He looks honestly worse sometimes than he does.
No, he does. He ends up looking like a little more cute at times.
Right.
But like those intermediary steps are a lot grosser, and a lot more monstrous.
Yeah, and we get like the close-ups of him like eating fish and like everything gushing out of his mouth and stuff. Peter Jackson loves his gross shots.
I'd be curious to know how those shots were achieved.
I'm sure curious. Practically. I'm sure there's something. I'm sure they were real. I know he loves his sort of like, gruesome stuff like that. So it was cool to see that in the Lord of the that find its way into the Lord of the Rings movies.
So you mentioned the Saruman scene, and I was quite taken with it. I thought this was a really clever way, when you're not going to do the Scouring of the Shire, which we talked about extensively in our last episode. You're not going to do the Scouring of the Shire, yet you have this character you need to wrap up. Now, I think a lot of this was cut from the theatrical version. I think it left kind of a hole there, and I was like, whatever happened to that guy?
Well, I think you're supposed to think he's just locked in Isengard, being like taken care of by the Ents.
Yeah. So anyway, but we go with the extended version on this podcast as the canonical version. So I thought it was smart. You have Grima there. You have Grima's backstabbing. You have Gandalf saying, "Don't trust anything that comes out of his mouth," and it was an exciting scene. You get. Him shooting a fireball looked a little odd to me. It was a weird moment of like very D&D magic in a world where you often don't see a lot of that sort of magic. I think it even makes like kind of a "pew" noise.
He's like fireball.
Yeah, exactly. But man, it was cool, and Christopher Lee is just so great in that role. Like he's hamming it up big time, but it fits the character. He's so perfect for that role.
He is a joy in this role. I think he, R.I.P. to one of the greats. And I mean, just in general, I know how much this story meant to him. I think it's well known. I don't know how factual it is, but supposedly he read the Lord of the Rings trilogy every year until his death.
Yeah.
I think he brings a lot to Saruman, and it's funny because in the appendices they're sort of having like a rap party, and this is, or maybe it was the premiere. It was the premiere, and he was kind of fucking with Peter Jackson for cutting this stuff out of the original cut of Return of the King.
Really?
He's like, don't worry, it'll make the extended cut. And he's like, yeah, but this is the best part. It all goes downhill from here. And like, the guy's just amazing. Like Christopher Lee seemed like such a cool guy. And
yeah,
I think famously he was like part of like the special forces or something like that for the English military.
Yeah. I remember like SAS or something.
And another amazing story from the appendices, he's supposed to get stabbed by Grima, and Peter Jackson's kind of trying to tell him how to like react to that. And Christopher Lee is like, no, that's not the noise that somebody makes when you stab them in the back. And he's like, this is the noise they make. And he like actually made the noise. And Peter Jackson was like, okay, well, I'm not going to push that issue. I'm just going to go ahead and assume that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. He was an incredible guy. If you want to research more about him, really, really interesting dude. RIP for sure. So next up, they're in Rohan, and first off, the music of Rohan is just so good. Like so much of Howard Shore's score, but I love how it's so tied to location. And every time you go to a new location, or you have a character who's like thinking about home, and then you'll hear a little bit of that musical cue. So good. Rohan's music in particular, amazing. And they have this party in the Great Hall. We have the drinking game between Legolas and Gimli, and that was honestly pretty funny. I don't mind that. I mean, the cross-eyed look from Gimli and stuff is a little silly, but I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? It was funny. One moment I thought was unintendedly comical to me was when Aragorn comes out in the morning and Eowyn is asleep, and he like covers her up, and she wakes up for a moment. She says, "What time is it?" He says, "Not yet dawn." And they're in like full sunlight. Like there's so much light in this scene. And I was like, where is this light coming from? If it's not yet dawn, is he lying to her? And then he walks outside and it's dark out. So it's a bizarre moment. Some of the lighting at times can be a little off. I noted that I think in Two Towers, I felt like Helm's Deep was way too bright. But, you can be forgiven of like, we need to see what's going on in the battlefield. But this scene, I thought was bizarre for it to be this incredibly well lit. She's like bathed in white light, and yet there's no indication of where that light's coming from.
It's magic torches on the wall, okay?
Movie magic, yeah.
There's also a moment when this might be a little later, but I have to talk about it now before I forget. There is, in terms of noticing little things after a lot of viewings, there's a moment when Aragorn sees the beacons have been lit, and he's like running back into the hall. And as he runs in, there's this moment that I always notice.
That happens a little later now.
This is later. A bit. Yeah, I'm skipping ahead just for this sort of behind the scenes kind of like watched it too many times moment. As Aragorn's running up to the guards that are standing at the hall, he kind of like fucks with one of the guards and like pushes their shield. Like he kind of like taps on their shield. Yeah, like reaches his arm like all the way out to
and
do
that's
it.
That's in the cut they used?
In
that's
the cut
funny.
that they used, yeah. And I think it could have either been, Viggo messing with somebody, one of the extras or something like that, or I don't know, a character choice. But something I always notice is that he like kind of like daps up this guy's shield as he runs into the hall. So keep an eye on that for your next viewing.
I have other little, observations that you only get after watching a movie a bunch of times that I'll hit you with throughout. But cool. Back at Rohan, I want to touch on a couple other things. There's a great moment where Gandalf is sort of despairing about their chances, and Aragorn is the one to reassure him and say, "What does your heart tell you?" And Gandalf, like, great acting with his eyes, Ian McKellen, but like he has this moment of like, "Ooh," and then he kind of goes like, "Yeah," and he like nods, and I don't know, it's like it's a little over the top at times, but like it's so endearing, like that just makes you love Gandalf, and also I think it's a great moment for Aragorn to show the wisdom he has as a character, and both of them, this is we've talked about. This is a story where the premise is and the message is, good will triumph over evil. Just trust your heart, and your heart knows it. And that's true in this universe. And, it wants you to believe that it's true in our universe. And I think a lot of people do want to believe that. And a lot of people love this series because it backs up that worldview. And that's on display here, and I think beautifully shown.
I had something to mention with Pippin touching the Palantir and sort of activating Sauron and getting his attention. I thought that it was interesting for Pippin to not fully realize what was going on, and for Merry to be the one who's like, and this is something that's been playing out through, like, Merry is the maybe more a little self-aware and understanding of the situations, and Pippin's just along for the ride having a good time. But Pippin does grow in this film. Yeah,
Pippin's greatest moments are in this film.
Yeah, and so having Merry sort of tell him like, you don't understand what you've done, like Sauron now thinks that you have the ring. I've always thought to be like a really interesting part. And like the danger and like being a singular hobbit, because these hobbits are always in pairs and like they always thrive in pairs. But whenever they're separated, it seems like they're not maybe as powerful or maybe, as comfortable. And so seeing Pippin go off with Gandalf, as much as Gandalf is like incredibly powerful and you'd feel safe, not having your buddy Merry there to back you up is a scary situation.
Well, and Merry and Pippin have always been this pair, right? This inseparable pair, and to have them separated, and there's that moment where Merry goes out to the battlements and he's standing by Aragorn and he talks about how like he's always looked out for him, and he doesn't know what's going to happen now. I think Aragorn says, we don't know what's going to happen now, and whether or not he'll ever see him again, I think is an open question at this point. And I thought that was a powerful moment, and yeah, I mean, separating these two, it's a really good idea, honestly, because the characters are so joined at the hip that they need to be separate, I think, to individually shine. And they do here. They each have a very different story and are able to shine on their own.
And I do love that they both end up in service of a king, two very different kings, but it leads to some interesting sort of parallels.
Yeah, which we talked about in the movie and the book episodes as well.
So to get to the next section here, Gollum leads Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee to Minas Morgul, where they see the Witch King of Angmar lead an army of orcs towards Gondor. The hobbits begin climbing a stair that is a secret tunnel into Mordor. The Witch King and his forces strike and overwhelm Osgiliath, forcing Faramir and his garrison to retreat to Minas Tirith. Believing that Sam desires the ring, Frodo tells him to go home. He and Gollum continue to the tunnel leading to Mordor. Gollum tricks him into venturing into the lair of the giant spider Shelob. Frodo escapes and confronts Gollum, telling him that he must destroy the ring for both their sakes. Gollum attacks Frodo, but falls down a chasm. Frodo goes to leave, but Shelob discovers, paralyzes, and binds him. Sam returns and drives her away, but then hides as orcs appear and take Frodo with them. The orcs then fight over ownership of Frodo's mithril vest, allowing Sam to escape with Frodo and continue their journey.
Okay, a lot happens here, a lot to touch on, but I think most important to me to get out right now, I just want to highlight how badass the Witch King looks in this film.
So good.
Getting armored up, and then when he flies out on his fucking dragon beast or whatever it is, he lands on the gates of Minas Morgul, and the orcs are coming out, and you know, it's like the most metal shit in the whole series. I talked about some metal shit in the first movie, but man, this is like, yeah, it looks like an album cover. It's so fucking cool.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. And it's like you get the green lighting and like the crazy like jagged sort of like, it used to be a man, a castle of man, and it's been turned by the orcs and everybody, and it's all like jagged and metal, and like he's like on the edge of it with this crazy fell beast. Totally agree. It's like it's got to be the most metal thing in the movie. Easy. Yeah. And I you know, we've played some World of Warcraft, you know, over the years, and I just kept thinking like how much Undercity seems to have been inspired by Minas Morgul and its whole like aesthetic. I was like, if someone saw this movie and was like, we got to design all of Undercity to look like this. So shout out if you play World of Warcraft. I almost said the most heartbreaking, but one of the most heartbreaking moments of the trilogy is when Frodo fully turns on Sam, which is a change from the book, and one that I think is really effective in sort of, you know, showing the tension that Gollum has created in the whole food situation. But when Sam is crying and just sitting there and they climb away without him, I'm at my lowest maybe of all of these movies. It's the worst part. Oh yeah, it was brutal. I agree. It was a smart move to sort of increase the wedge that is driven between Frodo and Sam, because it just makes it that much greater when they're sort of reunited and it's rebuilt. But yeah, that's tough, and especially the when Frodo takes Gollum's hand when they turn and walk away from Sam, like it's just like a dagger. Like and he says go home. It's brutal. Yeah, I agree. And they're already in Mordor, so it's like you're basically sending him off to die. Like who knows?
There's no way
you saw the garrison. You saw all of those orcs that are coming out to fight. Like how could he make it back anyway?
But it makes sense too. Like I remember I was so frustrated with Frodo the first time I saw this movie for this moment, but it makes sense. Like he's being manipulated by the ring, and you always have to remember that with Frodo. And the ring makes you paranoid about people stealing it from you. And it's going to turn you on the people that want to help you most. Like it's really smart in its own way, and it knows that Sam is the biggest danger to it. So of course it's going to turn Frodo on. So as much as it's Gollum, it is also the ring. It's those two working in concert on Frodo.
Right.
Oh, which I got to get it out now. I as much as famously in our first movie episode, I committed the blasphemy of saying I don't know how I feel about Elijah Wood in this role as Frodo. I kind of want to retract that statement. I still have some criticisms about his performance overall, but like he's great in this movie.
He's amazing.
And this is I think his best movie as far as like his performance. I think he does a lot of great acting throughout that is a really tough ask. There's a lot of internal struggles that he's trying to show on his face. Sure, people can have criticisms about him at times being a little goofy, but or what have you. But I mean, the guy's amazing, and his eyes are 3 sizes too big for his head, and it's incredible. The more once you notice it, you're like, what? Like, how is he shaped? It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, he's able to act with them, man. It's a powerful weapon in his arsenal.
Right. And not to mention the color. Like, it's like the deepest blue light blue you've ever seen. Anyway, enough about Elijah Wood's eyes.
Yeah, before we fall into them.
This moment where Sam leaves makes the moment where he finds the lembas bread so much more. I'm like, oh fuck yeah, Sam's about to go off. He's about to kill Gollum. Everything's ratcheted up for when he eventually, goes and tries to find Frodo, and eventually does. But it's as he's being attacked by Shelob, which I think Shelob for the time is probably one of the greatest feats of the CG department was able to pull off. Like that Shelob in no way looks
good.
like it's dated to me.
Yeah, no, it looks solid. And I gotta shout out the fact that I don't, it's kind of weird, but they are Peter Jackson is really hitting on some phobias in this movie. Not only the arachnophobia, but the fear of heights. That stare is the stuff that, like, if you have a fear of heights, like I kind of do, it will it'll creep into your nightmares, because that thing is so steep. It's wild.
It's not even in any way functional. There's no way you could climb that. But there's a moment when they're at the Paths of the Dead, the Rohirrim are there, and one of the guards sort of walks towards the edge to look out and see the troops that are there. And like the angle at which the shot is, it's kind of like from bird's eye view, and we're looking straight down a cliff face. So I definitely feel what you're saying with like sort of like he's trying to induce.
Yeah, he's doing it on purpose for sure. Well, and when Sam falls, when he stumbles, like you're talking about, when he finds the Limbus bread, that fall is like maybe the peak moment of like, oh my god, he's falling, it's happening.
You brought two things up for me. The first one being. Something I wanted to mention in this movie is, the use of perspective. We've talked about it probably in all three of the movie episodes at this point, but the masterful use of perspective is a camera technique that I think nowadays you don't even necessarily need as much because of, the advent of so much technology and everything. But like the old school filmmaking classic techniques to sort of play with the, famously the hobbits versus the men and things like that. But there are moments that I think, in order to like draw focus, or like in terms of Peter Jackson's blocking, I think in order to draw focus to the eye, there are moments where he has like the ring loom large, using the perspective of like people standing further back. In order to create that technique, you have to like cheat it and have the person standing so far away but have their eye line correct. And like there's this moment that you're talking about with the reveal after Sam falls, he hits his face, and we pull out a little bit to reveal the Lembas bread there, and like the perspective as he goes to grab it, I think is just like, it's just such a smart technique, because it's using the audience's like film knowledge to really show like the importance of this and what it means to the moment. But then from that shot, he like tilts up and shows like the sheer rock that he just fell off of. So like he uses like this whole like pull out, like show the perspective of the bread, and then tilt up to show like where he just fell from. And like I think it just makes for really engaging shots. And I think overall I don't think I need to talk too much more about how amazing this movie looks. Like the cinematography is amazing, as well as the production design and everything else. But that specific moment, I can remember being like, damn, that was cool when he like pulled out and showed the Lembas bread. The other thing I wanted to mention was Peter Jackson. From the appendices, I learned that Peter Jackson famously is a huge arachnophobe, and he, rather than being like squeamish about it, he leaned into it and was like, I'm going to make a scene that absolutely terrifies me and I can barely watch. So that was like an objective that he went out to achieve. Is that when
Shelob is creeping up on Frodo? That moment? Because that's the moment, man. That when it's like behind him, when it's over top of him, ooh, yeah. I am not a fan of spiders, so that got me pretty good.
And then we get Sam going into Cirith Ungol and like having that shadow on the wall cast, and he's like growling and trying to be crazy, and then instead of them running away in fear, we get the moment of him revealing himself as a hobbit, which I find to be even more badass. And then he like fights his way up, and he's like, this is for my gaffer, this is for me. And there's a couple of those moments. There's a couple of those like sort of cliche moments that I feel like take those out and maybe put in something more original. I think people would. Those are some of the jokes that I feel like they're jokes, but they're also meant to be really cool. But I think that one worked. But there's also another.
That one works for me. Yeah.
But there's also another moment. I'll just talk about it now, where Aragorn is like, he's like, halt, you may go no further, and they're like, oh yeah, who's gonna make us? You and what army? And then like the army of the dead comes out. Yeah,
that's the army of the dead, man. That's maybe the worst moment in the whole movie, and it starts disc 2 if you watch them on discs like I did. Right. So it's a real brutal way to start the second half of this movie. You're gonna defend that line? Because I don't know, man. I might fight you on it.
No, I'm not gonna.
Do I gotta get my axe right now?
No, I don't want to defend it. I brought it up because it's a moment that I feel like is like kind of cliche and cringy in the way that like this is for me, this is for my gaffer, like that sort of.
I thought that line was good though. I don't see the. I think one's good, one's bad is the comparison I see.
But it's not like it's something that's from a bunch of movies that you've seen before, right? Like it's not like.
I guess I don't normally see people calling out their gaffer.
Yeah, true.
I just love that.
This
word,
one's for
man.
me. This one's for so and so. This one's for all of those things. Just struck me as kind of cliche, but again, I don't think that was the one that I had a problem with. The ghost one I had more of a problem with.
Yeah.
But yeah, we get in the extended cut, I believe, is different than the original, where we get to see like the full-on battle that the orcs have over the Mithril and like what it creates, the battle within Cirith Ungol.
But before we get to that battle, though, I want to back up a little bit to Shelob's lair because and the encounter with Shelob that occurs later on the path. It's one of Sam's best moments, so we can't just kind of gloss over it, right? He shows up, he's got the light, he's got the sword, and he has an epic showdown with this spider. Great fight. It's well choreographed for a fight between a person and a giant CGI monster that doesn't behave in ways that like make a lot of sense to us as people. And all those challenges still, like it's a great fight. It's a moment where we just cheer for Sam, and the way he says like don't what does he say, get off of him, you filth, or something like that, and it's so good.
I just love that he's like you'll never touch him again, and like pulls the light out, and like that moment forever makes, when I think of Return of the King, that's a like image that pops into my head, is Sam holding out the light with Sting in his hand fighting Shelob.
So good. And then let's finish out this moment with Frodo and Sam, and then we got to get back to Minas Tirith. But and then going to Cirith Ungol. One thing I had here that I'll go ahead and bring up, and I found a couple moments where I felt like there was an odd choice in the editing that created a problem where there shouldn't have been a problem. And for me, one of them is here because we see the fight break out, and then it desperately needed to cut away to something else, and then return later. And then we see Sam enter the newly sort of emptied out fortress where everyone has died. But instead there is no intercut, and immediately Sam comes in and everyone's dead, and it just felt weird with like my like notion of cinematic time. It felt like not enough time had passed between the fight breaking out and what happened. It's not a huge problem, but like these are the things that I think edits can smooth out. And there, there's another one that happens later I'll touch on, but where I had some quibbles with the editing department and how they cut things together.
Yeah, no, I mean, and for this extended cut, you have to think, like, if he was actually going to release this as the official theatrical cut, they probably would have done some sort of pickup or something. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I didn't notice that, but it's probably something that I'll notice from now on.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
But yeah, cool fight. The fight breaking out, and the way like he kicks the guy down the well, and then the other guy goes out the window, and it kicks the whole battle off. I thought that looked good.
And again, like I can't stop talking enough about how amazing these orcs looked even today. Like it's just like absolutely incredible. Some of them you can tell are sort of like B orcs, like they shouldn't be too close to camera, but the ones that are like right up in your face, and like you can tell they got people who had interesting shaped faces and things like that in order to like really convey the entire orc look, and it just really works, a lot of it. Let's
go back to Minas Tirith, because we got to talk about Denethor, we got to talk about the Minas Tirith in general, Faramir, lots of stuff goes on there. Pippin entering his service, and Denethor is a shit in the books too, but he's really shit in these movies. They do a lot to make him detestable. In particular, the scene where first off, he orders Faramir after losing Osgiliath to go back out and fight. And there's this really powerful moment where we see this pointless charge, and then we get the song from Pippin, which is really, really, really good.
Yeah, in terms of intercutting, like that was a moment that really stands out to me. Is like amazing.
But also intercutting Denethor just noshing on some fucking little tomatoes.
Oh, I hate it.
And just squirting all over his chin. One of the grossest food eating scenes I've ever seen. He's like eating like undercooked chicken. Like it's all disgusting. It's great though. You know what I mean? Like it's it's the way of like telling us so much about this character, that he's doing this during this moment where all these men are dying, that he is sent out for no reason. including his own son. It shows his madness, and it's an effective scene, so I just got to give him props for that.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to John Noble for being like the most detested character in all of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But especially, dude, I mean, the thing that really gets me is he doesn't even know how to eat. That's how evil of a king he is. He doesn't even know how to eat.
Sprays it all over his own chin.
It's like, oh man, I hate him so much in these movies. And yeah, you're totally right. The singing mixed with like the just like absolutely grotesque way he eats, and then having his son, it just matches,
And then this like crazy charge at the same time.
it just matches like how gruesome and disgusting he is as a human for sending his son out on this fool's mission.
Great scene. And yeah, I mean, shout out to him. If you want to repair his image, go watch some Fringe, which was a pretty solid show, and he's much more likable in that show as sort of the eccentric scientist. So also in this section is Pippin lighting the signal fires, which then sets off this cascade of signal fires being lit across the countryside. And I mean, it's a pretty obvious observation to make, but I got to make it. Who's lighting these fires? Do they live on top of these like crazy peaks?
Yeah, they do.
Like, how long have they been there? Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you really think about it.
It definitely doesn't. But like, how excited? If that's your job and you live up there, how excited are you when you see the beacon get lit? You're like, oh my god!
You're like, my grandfather lived his whole life and never lit this beacon, yet I've been here,
right?
And I live in this crazy peak. Like, some of those were wild, like so unreachable,
but very, very cool looking, very cinematic, and like all the countryside of New Zealand we get to see is worth it.
Yes, they should have made it magical, man. They should and honestly, I feel like if you hadn't shown the guys run up and light the first one, or like the second or third one, whichever it is, where like the actual guys with torches run up and light it, then you would have been like, I don't know how those got lit. Maybe it was magic. And then you would have shrugged it off. But because you showed the men run up with torches and light it, it implies that every single one of those is being physically lit, which is just a logistical nightmare. But anyway, we can move on. Not worth lingering on too long.
It does make me think of something else. The men, I never knew this until this time of watching the appendices, or at least I didn't remember it. It wasn't like imprinted in my brain. There's like 4 guards who stand, and maybe this was probably in the book too, but there's 4 guards who stand around the tree, and they don't serve the steward. They only serve the king. And so like they're like, I'm sure that they like bring on new people as people age out and everything, but there are 4 guards always standing around that tree.
Ceremonial guards, yeah.
in order to protect it and that kind of thing.
I don't remember that from the book, but it might have been there, yeah. Cool. It's a cool detail.
One of those details, and they actually wear different helmets and armor than everyone else. So just interesting, cool details that I didn't realize until now. So who's to say that like anyone even noticed it other than to add more texture to the world? It's just very cool stuff. So on to the next part. Aragorn learns from Elrond that Arwen is dying, having refused to leave Middle-earth to be with Aragorn after seeing a vision of their future son. Elrond reforges Narsil into Anduril so that Aragorn can reclaim his birthright and gain reinforcements from the ghostly dead men of Dunharrow. Joined by Legolas and Gimli, Aragorn travels to the dead men's lair, pledging to release them from Isildur's undead curse should they come to Gondor's aid. Faramir is gravely wounded after a futile effort to retake Osgiliath, and Denethor falls into madness. Gandalf is left to defend the city against the Orc army. Denethor attempts to kill himself and Faramir on a pyre. Pippin alerts Gandalf and they save Faramir, but a burning Denethor leaps to his death from the top of Minas Tirith just before Theoden and his nephew Éomer arrive with the Rohirrim. During the ensuing battle, the Witch King mortally wounds Theoden. Éowyn kills the Witch King with Merry's help, but Theoden dies. Aragorn arrives with the army of the dead, who overcome Sauron's forces and win the battle. Aragorn then frees the dead men from their curse. All
right, man, are you ready for my skull avalanche?
Let's talk about it.
We got it. I'm gonna get it out of the way. Honestly, yeah. I'm not gonna talk about it anymore. But I hate this. I hate this whole scene. I hate the dead. I hate the way they worked. They should have only been used in the way that they were used in the book, and that's to get on those ships.
I agree.
And then
we
should have had an army of living people with Aragorn. I know I can trace it back, and I can see the thinking. I can see someone saying, We can't have the Dunedain show up in the movie because it raises too many questions. Who are these people? It makes Aragorn seem like he does have a home, and that he does have people who follow him, which muddies the water when it comes to him becoming the king of Minas Tirith, king of Gondor. I can see the decision making. I still don't agree with it, because you take this the dead, and you ruin in many ways, not completely, but in many ways, it is just a terrible way to end the battle at Minas Tirith, Pelennor Fields, which is such an amazing battle. Like, I was thinking back and I'm like, why does this battle not get more love? Like, it is so many ways. It's even better than Helm's Deep. It's so good. And I think a lot of it is the way it ends. And the way the dead come in and mop everything up. They can make crazy noises as they're like overcoming things. Like, it's so dumb, and I hate it. And that's all I'm gonna say about it.
Okay. All right, I want to jump in here. A couple of things. I think I much prefer the look and everything that goes on with the undead when they're in the caves. When they are in the battlefield, that's when I start to have more of a problem with them. I do think something that during this viewing, something that really struck me is like the skulls avalanche just doesn't look right. During that scene, it doesn't look right.
It looks bad. Yeah, it's real bad.
But what I found out in the appendices is that all of that is practically shot and then composited in. Like the stuff, they've practically shot all of them like having skulls cascade on all of the actors and everything, and then it's just like the background.
Okay, but the skulls are probably like made out of styrofoam or something. So
probably.
You know what I mean? It looks bad. What practical or CGI or whatever it is.
Right, I was just surprised because of the way it looked. I actually thought that it was kind of just like an early CG hiccup kind of thing, but they actually shot it, and that's sort of how it all turned out.
It's real silly. Honestly, there's the old cliche about jump the shark moment. It felt a little bit like that to me. It was like, oh God. I think that scene was cut from the theatrical, which was a really smart move. Because it looks real bad, and it felt like there was no coming back from it. Luckily, they do come back from it, and there are a lot of spectacular moments that follow this.
On my watching as well, I have the Blu-ray that splits it right there as well. So when I started to back up, almost the first thing we see in that second disc too is Legolas like comically getting his bow pushed by Gimli and shooting Peter Jackson in the chest. Which pretty funny. I think one of the funny moments that works for me for sure. Yeah, and then, but like, I'm not going to defend.
Although that scene in itself is terrible, so.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend. I'm not going to defend the rest of it. I just think, I think they were sort of coming at it from the right basis, trying to do what they could with technology at the time. I don't think it works. I think, like you say, I think the reason that the Battle of Pelennor Fields isn't remembered more fondly is because the ghost stuff goes a little crazy, and we get Legolas sliding down the nose of a Oliphant.
And honestly, that didn't bother me as much as the dead this time around. Like, it looks a little bad and it's a little silly. Maybe that trunk thing is the worst part of it, but like, it's the dead that's the problem for me. Anyway, I don't want to harp on it too much. I do want to propose one more thing though, because I was thinking about it, and I don't know if this is canon or not. Maybe I missed it, but why does Isildur's curse actually work on an entire legion of people and like truly curse them and make them beings that are stuck and that can come back and fight? And I was wondering if it's because when Isildur curses them, does he have the Ring of Power? Is this like another thing that the ring can do? Because so often I keep thinking about the ring and it's supposed to have all this power, yet all we see it do is make people turn invisible. And I'm wondering if this is like one of the implications is that it grants you this like mystical ability to do things like cursed an entire nation of people.
Yeah, I also think that that's a good observation. I had never thought of it like that before. But I also always think about the fact that the only people that we see wielding the ring and wearing it are halflings. So
other than when Isildur has it for a while, but then dies.
But we don't really get to see that. We just for a moment. So we don't really know like what the ring could do in the hands of someone else. Like Gandalf talks about why he refuses it. We have
we see Smeagol, who is essentially a hobbit. He's not actually a hobbit, but he kind of is. He's the only other person we see wear the ring. Yeah,
right. As far as I think Gandalf says something along the lines of like something similar to a hobbit.
Galadriel?
Galadriel also refuses the ring, and she says like what she would become with the ring. Yeah. So I think it has to do with like the hobbits wielding it. She turns
all blue and spooky looking.
Yeah, exactly. A queen.
So anyway, we're done. I'm not talking about the dead anymore. It's over. Minas Tirith, the Pelennor Fields, incredible battle. Theoden never fails to just fucking stir the heartstring. What is it? Play the heartstrings? I don't know. I'm mixing my metaphors. He delivers these speeches. Shout out to the performance. So good. It's just like that charge, like in that speech, like it's one of the moments that brought tears to my eyes. I had 3 I wrote down where I got a little bit of waterworks going. This was my first one.
Yeah,
a little misty. And this one is it's so epic. It's his speech is so stirring, and then they're charging into battle, and like you can tell on his face, like he does a lot where he like looks at something, he looks at a threat, and he goes like, "Oh fuck, there's no way we can handle this." Mm-hmm. And then he like steels himself, and he's like, "But I'm the leader, and this is my moment, and I gotta rally the troops." And then he like does this thing, and like he does it a couple times, and it's so good.
There's literally a moment too in the extended cut where they say like, we can never hope to stand against the forces of Mordor, and he's like, "No, we can't." But then he gives an amazing speech also.
Meet them nonetheless, or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's also great stuff. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, he does it at Helm's Deep. He does it pre Pelennor Fields. He does it, right before during the fight. Yeah. Great. I mean, honestly, again, if we're just shouting people out, Bernard Hill, shout out. Like, absolutely crushes it as Theoden.
Yeah, there's a moment where he looks up and he sees the Witch King coming on the Fell Beast, and he knows he's dead. He looks at it and he has this moment. He goes, "Oh, this is it. This is my moment." And I thought that was so well acted because he doesn't say a word, and you can just tell.
Yeah, I was in the appendices. They talk a lot about how they thought Helm's Deep was about as crazy as something that Peter Jackson could throw at all of the departments, and then they got Pelennor Fields and they got the battle right here at Minas Tirith, and just they took every kind of facet of all the battles leading up to this and mashed it all together. You have massive trolls, you have like giant trebuchets and all kinds of like towers that they're like breaching the walls with and stuff, and like
the aerial assault of the Fell Beast flying in.
Amazing. That whole sequence is unbelievable. This I think you're right. The ghosts probably do kind of sour the scene for a lot of people.
Nope, we're not talking about them anymore. They're done. Let's forget about them.
Okay, I've already forgotten. Forget about who.
No, we're going to talk about how epic it is, man. Gandalf, Pippin comes and gets him, says, it's going to burn Faramir, and then he's riding up, and then the fucking Witch King flies down, lands in front of him, whips out his sword, lights it on fire, breaks Gandalf's staff.
Maybe I lied. That's pretty metal. I may have lied. That's pretty metal also.
It's so good, man. It's so good. He, in general, the fucking Witch King slays it in this movie. And, he's a villain, but, I mean, he's so fucking good as a villain. He's so scary. And to see him, like, level Gandalf, and you see Gandalf doubting, and, like, later when he's talking to Pippin, he's, like, talking about being dead, and once again, kind of sounds like he's getting on the boat and going to the shores, and when he's talking about being dead, so once again, it seems like this is, like, a metaphor for heaven, and, like, all the elves are going to heaven. I don't know.
And then we have to talk about Eowyn. Like this,
yes.
I think as much as people have said over time, and I agree, I totally agree, these movies don't do a great job of representing the female characters in Middle Earth. I have to give credit where credit's due. I think they do a much better job in the movies. And
than the books, for sure.
Than the books, yeah. And we get, especially in the extended edition, we get a lot more of Arwen. We get a lot more of Eowyn. And this Eowyn, I mean, this is one of my favorite parts of Return of the King, easily. Like just the way that she kills the Fell Beast and then lunges in, kills the Witch King, and like the way he like crumbles, and that's how he dies. Like his face kind of crumbles in.
Well, and she gets hit in the arm, just like in the book.
And I don't mind the fact that the line has been changed to "I am no man." And and that I think it still works. I think maybe it's more. I think it's more interesting in the book where we get like the sort of like whole thing that she recites, like this is my kin and I'll slay you before you could get to him. I think it's definitely more eloquent, but it's a movie and you have to be kind of economic with your time.
It probably didn't make sense for her to say that much. I think I kind of prefer the movie version, and I got to shout this out. I think this is one of the most obvious and yet one of the best changes from book to film, and that is the fact that Theoden sees her fighting on his behalf, realizes that it is Eowyn, and talks to her before he dies. These are all changes from the book. And I think it's an obvious change to make, yet I applaud them for making it because it is probably the best change, or it's right up there, one of the best changes.
Yeah, I love the change.
it really adds weight to the moment, and it shows Theoden that he's been wrong. There's just so many things that I think are important that happen here. When Theoden's dying, another thing that I really liked was the line where he talks about how he goes to join his forefathers, and now he will deserve to be in their company. And like, you could just tell it's so important to this guy. Like, I don't know that I really feel this way, but it's so important to him. Like, it's such a character moment for Theoden, and he truly feels like, and you're like, yeah, man, you totally have, like, you've earned it.
Right. Whereas like he would have disgraced the family line had he been manipulated by Wormtongue and all that stuff. And like, he's really shown like his mettle and its glory. And like, especially for this world, you can tell that people are very much, that's important to them, like getting back to making good on their ancestors and doing something noble with your life.
Oh, and smart writing to make it even more tragic when he, after saying all that, he says, Eowyn, he like kind of looks like he has something more to tell her, but then he dies. Yeah. That's a smart move. Makes it even more heartbreaking when he dies.
Right, sure. Leaving that mystery, definitely.
Yeah. It's like, what was he going to say? Yeah. So I do want to point out a weird editing thing that happens after the battle's sort of winding down. I talked about the other one. Here's another one I noticed this time. They find Eowyn on the battlefield, take her inside to the healing area. She fully recovers, meets Faramir. They make moon eyes at each other. They're looking out the window. Then we cut back and Merry's on the battlefield and he finds Pippin. And I was like, this is a weird way to cut this. I get you're trying to convey some time has passed, but like, that seems like a lot of time has passed and no one helped him look for fucking Merry. Like, Aragorn just pieced out and was like, yeah, I don't care about Merry. I care more about, it was weird. It felt like they needed to like cut those things up a little differently. Again, I think it's an editing thing. So yeah, a couple quibbles I had with the editing of how these scenes played out. Oh, another moment, Denethor, when he is on fire and he runs out. I was thinking about how the extended cut has created a problem of they've shown that I think this is only in the extended cut, they've shown that these tombs are in like a different area. They had to cross this big bridge to get to. Mm-hmm. And yet he runs out and somehow jumps off the front of the tip of that Minas Tirith like spike thing that's jutting out. So he would have had to run like 3 or 4 football fields worth of distance to get there, which doesn't make a lot of sense, even though it's a cool looking scene. And I think it's something where the extended cut created a bit of a problem that they just kind of shrugged their shoulders about.
I think there were probably situations that happened also, and this is just me playing devil's advocate. I agree, it's probably some sort of extended edition like editing issue, and they sort of like worked with what they had shot. But I'm sure that there was probably this situation that ended up where they were like, okay, this after they had shot that scene, they pretty much right away realized that they were like, okay, this scene's gonna get cut. Unfortunately, like that was a cool scene where they like crossed over and went to the tombs. Like in terms of like making it clear to the audience, I think it's faster to just like make it seem like the tombs are somewhere closer by. And so in the theatrical cut, when they decided to have him like jump off, it was probably a decision that was made because they realized within the theatrical cut that they weren't going to have that other scene that they added back in for the extended cut, something like that.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, I did want to pop back over to Sam and Frodo for a second because there's a moment at the end of their scene that I wanted to touch on, and that's when Frodo thinks that he's lost the ring, and Sam says, "No, I found it, or I've been holding it for you, just holding it." And he goes to give it back to him, and when Frodo kind of freaks out, and you can tell on his face he's going to have this moment of like, "Oh no, I can't believe you took it." And we're ready to like be like, God damn it, Frodo. Of course he's not going to steal it. It's Sam. You know what I mean? Like, why are you being like this? But then we see Sam hesitate and look at the ring. And I thought that was a really smart way of showing the power of the ring, that even Sam, who absolutely took it with the best of intentions, has this moment of hesitation, and it calls back to the book where we know about Sam the gardener, and he has this like fantasy about what he would do if he had the ring.
Right.
It's really smart. We don't get the inner thoughts of Sam, yet we see the hesitation, and Frodo, I think, actually handles it really well, because Frodo knows in this moment, like, this thing is going to be a problem, and it's going to try and make you not give it back to me, because I know how it is.
Right.
I think the first time I saw this movie, I just didn't fully give Frodo credit for, like, how much he understands the ring. And there's a moment that happens a little bit earlier where he tells Gollum, like, I have to destroy it for us both, because he really pities Gollum because he understands what the ring has done to him. And that's why he doesn't kill him in that moment. It's after they are escaping Shelob's lair. And again, once again, it's Frodo understanding the ring, and it's a great performance by Elijah Wood.
I like the idea of Sam being the character who's most easily able to give up the ring. And I guess technically he is still, but the lingering has always kind of made me think, like, I still think he would give it up. Had he been given another second or two, he still would have handed it to Frodo. But the snatching, I think,
and he essentially does.
I like the addition of like from the book of sort of having that hesitation, and just showing the power of the ring. It just corrupts everyone.
And I think it's important to note, right, because we're building to the moment where Frodo in Mount Doom turns back. And if we don't really drive home just how powerful the ring is, like, it's too powerful for any one person to best. And I think that's on display here, no matter who it is, even if it was Sam. This is the thing where, like, people often, I think it's kind of an easy observation to make, and I don't even agree with it, where people will say, like, well, Sam should have been the ring bearer. He would have done it. He would have cast it into the fire. And I don't agree with that, because, like, the ring is that powerful. I don't think any one person could have done it.
You know what's interesting too is I don't think they would have made it. Like, so let's say Sam is the ring bearer and Frodo is his friend who's helping him along. I think that Sam was the perfect personality to be the person who helps the ring bearer, because him as the ring bearer being corrupted, and then having Frodo, who may not have been as well intentioned as Sam and maybe eventually would have maybe not given up on him, but wouldn't have had the same love or whatever it is. I think that it worked out perfectly. And if it was if it was flipped, I don't think that they would have made it. I think that Frodo wouldn't have been able to give Sam the support that Sam gave Frodo.
I agree.
All right, in this last section here, Aragorn decides to march upon the Black Gate as a distraction so Frodo and Sam can reach Mount Doom. Gollum attacks Frodo and Sam just as they reach Mount Doom. As Frodo stands on the ledge over the volcanic fire, he succumbs to the ring and claims it as his own, putting it on his finger. Gollum manages to find and attack him, biting off his finger to reclaim the ring. Frodo fights back, and as they struggle for the ring, both fall over the ledge. Gollum falls into the lava with the ring and dies. Sam rescues Frodo as the ring disintegrates in the lava. As Frodo and Sam escape, Sauron is destroyed. Gandalf flies in with the Eagles to rescue the hobbits, who awaken in Minas Tirith and are reunited with the surviving Fellowship. Aragorn is crowned King of Gondor and takes Arwen as his queen. The hobbits return to the Shire. And a few years later, Frodo departs Middle-earth with his uncle Bilbo, Gandalf, and the elves. He leaves Sam the Red Book of Westmarch, which details their adventures. Sam returns to the Shire, where he embraces Rosie and their children.
I gotta shout out the Mouth of Sauron. We had fun with him in the book where he was don't kill the messenger, and he's just this dude. The change to have him be this, like, disgusting mouth with a weird helmet and really be a striking character. I think is a good one. I mean, watching him talk was just a horrific thing to do. And then Aragorn chopping his head off was also kind of a cool shift. I like that.
I think the Mouth of Sauron is really interesting, and it's cut in the theatrical edition, but I believe at least I haven't seen it in such a long time, but the extended edition, it's there, and I think it's really cool because we don't really get to see the forces of Sauron that are interesting and unique, other than the Nazgul and the orcs and obviously the Uruk-hai. So, like, to see another sort of creature monster kind of thing that is performing Sauron's will, I thought was really cool and looks really, really amazing, honestly. So just to wrap up the battle of the Black Gate, I mean, the speech that Aragorn gives, I think, lives up to any speech that Theoden gives. It's right there with it. There may come a day when we forsake our friends and all that, and it's just such a great speech that I remember. That's the other moment I would say that I think of in Return of the King. It's basically like the destruction of the ring, Sam with the light against Shelob, and the speech that Aragorn gives really are like the big moments that stand out in my mind when I think of this story. Yeah. And I mean, Viggo Mortensen, like what can you possibly say that isn't like he just seems like the coolest, like most perfect person to ever play Aragorn. I just constantly fascinated. Every time I watch the appendices, I learn something new about the guy. He seems very funny and loving, and I just think he really embraced the role of Aragorn, and you know, this moment for him to like be the king but not quite have fully taken the crown yet.
He seems like an actor who went on after this film to have an interesting career. Like it feels like he could have been in a lot more sort of big blockbuster films than he's in. Like it felt more like he was like, yeah, I'm good, and now I'm going to do like projects that interest me solely. Like that's all you see him in anymore. He's not in those, you know, he's not in Fast 10 when it's coming out next year.
Right.
You know what
there
I mean?
were a couple that he did right after this that you could see like he was doing this sort of leading man thing.
Oh, yeah, he was in like there was one about a horse.
Hidalgo.
Hidalgo, yeah. But that, I mean,
like I said, I think I'm not, and that's not to say like I totally agree with what you're saying. I'm just mentioning some of them, and I think he really does go for some things that he sees, you know, good in, and things that he believes in.
History of Violence.
History of Violence is very good, yeah. So I think he's really like carved a career for himself that he wanted. You know, he's not really interested in doing things for others. He wants to. Well, I mean,
artistically challenging or enriching seems to be what he goes for.
So yeah, and then the for Frodo moment is amazing, and then we get into the volcanic Frodo stuff, Mount Doom, and you mentioned the shot. We'll mention the shot one more time where he sort of ice skates into the mouth of lava pit.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the good though. Like so much it goes down in this final showdown that's so good. Frodo turning back and saying, "The ring is mine." It's like the most black moment of all black moments.
Do you like the acting as well? Like, are you into the moment of him turning evil and putting the ring on? And like, I feel like I really bought that stuff.
I think it works for me, man. Yeah, it works for me. It's all good. And the heartbreak on Sam, like that's where it really sells. Is Sam going like, you know, what are you waiting for? And then no, like he's just so heartbroken to see Frodo turn back. And then I mean, Gollum, the epic struggle, the biting off of the finger. It's just an iconic moment. Yeah. And you know, I think Peter Jackson does it right. And then one of the coolest moments of special effects is honestly when the ring is destroyed after Gollum falls into the lava. And plummets, is when the tower is collapsing, and then it explodes off to the side. Like it's so fucking cool looking.
I got to tell you an appendice story now. So so for this shot at the time, one man over the course of 2 weeks in kind of a special effects suite that he had built for himself over Christmas break when basically everybody else was not working. He meticulously built individual pieces that almost went together like Legos in order to build an exact like within the computer built like this amazing like individually like painstaking thousands and thousands of pieces. No, well, I'm sure it was at some point. I think this was a miniature. Okay. I think this was a miniature artist who was creating something in a 3D space, and so he created this. He created this like model that they were able to then blow up and have it become kind of particulate and but it was just a crazy appendice story that they went out of their way to talk about, and this guy it was like a legendary moment because it was like they were like, he said he was working 7 days a week, 18-hour days for like 2 weeks to like get this done, and you know, they were like, this guy probably didn't even leave his computer chair for the entire time. And
shout out to him, man. I do have to back up a little bit here and talk about the other moment that got the waterworks going for me, and that it never fails. Is honestly it's kind of a combination. It's like a culmination of moments, but it's Sam and Frodo talking about the Shire, and Frodo saying how he can't taste anything anymore, and then them collapsing, and then of course Sam picking him up and saying he can carry him, and then the look on his face is kind of what gets me, like the determination,
right? And
he's just like taking him up the mountain, like it's so good. Got a little misty-eyed there too. Always gets me.
Definitely, that always gets me as well.
And then I got a third one coming. I'll hit on, but that was number 2.
Yeah. These moments that you're mentioning very much affect me as well. That I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you is you know, always going to be a moment that I don't know that I can stop myself from crying. And so it's just like you say, it's a culmination of all of the efforts of everything involved with these movies, in addition to the fact that like just on a story level, you know, we're so bought into the tale of these two friends at this point, and it mirrors kind of like any struggle you have in life. Like you're like, you know, if you have somebody there to lean on, and like it just makes it kind of mirrors kind of makes me reflect on people who've been there for me and that kind of thing. So, and I think that's what you do with stories a lot, is kind of put your own life to it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I think it also, this time around, I really picked up on Sam realizing, genuinely, I can't carry this, but I can carry you.
Right.
Because he now knows the danger of the ring, and he recognizes that he is susceptible to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess in a way that line hit just a little differently this time for me, and still great and great moment. And then the Eagles sweep in. They do some battle, which I liked. It was kind of a nice addition to have them actually take on the fell beasts in the air, and then they rescue our hobbits, and we go into the extended finale. And I struggled with this in the theater. I remember I had to pee so bad. And I'm just gonna say, like, it felt like it was in slow motion. It felt like the characters, and in particularly Frodo, speak in slow motion at times. Like,
well, there are moments where it is in slow motion for sure.
Drawn out lines. I'm like, why are you talking so slow? And they take their sweet time with it, but like, this movie, I think honestly plays best if you split it into probably 6. Like the books are 6 books, I guess, if you look at like the technical book splits. Watch it in six separate sittings, not the trilogy, that is. Watch this film in 2 for sure, if not more. And then it won't be a problem. And it wasn't a problem for me this time. I was down for it, you know what I mean? Because I didn't have this like, oh my God, I gotta go pee, moment. Yeah,
I can't remember who said it, but it really made me laugh very hard. On Twitter, like this past week, someone tweeted, they were basically like, damn, boyfriends really love 3-hour movies. And for some reason, it really just made me fucking laugh very hard.
That is funny, man.
I think
this one's almost 5 hours.
Yeah, I think it was in reference to The Irishman, but just in general, It's a really funny thing to say. And sometimes I feel for my girlfriend. I'm like, I'm sorry that this movie's so long if you're not enjoying it, but it's a journey sometimes. And not to say that she doesn't like long movies as well. It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm in for a movie from the 1950s that's in black and white that's 3 hours long, and she might not be.
And we all love binging TV shows though. So I sometimes think just the ability to get up and go to the bathroom,
right,
make a sandwich or whatever you got to do, like, really helps. So don't be afraid to pause a long movie. Like, don't feel like you have to be uninterrupted. Anyway, we're beside the point. The third scene happens here. And I'm gonna leave it. What do you think? I think this would be fun. In this final goodbyes and everything else that occurs at Minas Tirith and elsewhere, what is the moment that you think got me, or that gets me every time?
It's one of 2 moments that I would guess, but I'm gonna guess the one.
I'll give you 2 guesses. Sure.
Okay, 2 guesses. Okay, so the first one I'm guessing, because you're giving me 2 guesses, is the Bilbo and Frodo stuff in the carriage ride on their way to the what?
That's not it.
No? Okay, then it's a
good moment. It's a good moment. That's not the one that gets me.
Then I think it's physically at the Grey Havens when they're gonna set out and Frodo says he's gonna leave, and like Sam's reaction to that.
It's not it.
No? What is it?
No, you didn't get into.
What is it?
It is when all of Gondor kneels to the 4 hobbits, and including Aragorn, and they say, "You kneel to no one." And the looks on all their faces as they're looking around and everybody's looking at them, it just fucking slays me every time.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I totally agree. I think the only reason I didn't think about that scene is because it's so affecting to me, and I've seen it so many times, because there will be times that I just go on YouTube and watch that scene. You know what I mean? Like, that's a scene that, like, it's that, I love that scene. And it's funny that I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. That's the one. That's number 3 for me. There were lots of moments where, I'm feeling tons of emotions, but that's the one that actually gets the tears out. Yeah,
I have no problem with the endings, the way that it's all done. Like, I don't know. I get that the journeys or the climax has happened, but sort of like the coming back down of this story, I get that it's like 30 minutes long, but for me, like, I think it's worthy. I think like there's been a lot of, there's 9 hours worth, 10 hours worth of movies up to this point. So like, I don't know, an extra 30 minutes to see how it all wraps. And it is kind of like really soothing to just know how it all slowly, you're kind of coming back from this journey and you're getting to live with the characters and see how they're affected by it. And like, and one of my favorite scenes is just seeing the hobbits back in the inn,
so good,
back in the bar drinking together.
So smart, and something that I think is kind of subtle, and I at least didn't think about, like, actively, but they're not the story. And that's such a good moment. The story is the guy with the big pumpkin. They're in the bar, and like they've just got bowed to by all of Gondor. Yet when they're in the bar drinking, they're looking at each other, and they know what they've been through. Yet the story of the town and everyone is surrounding this guy who just grew this massive pumpkin.
Right.
And like that's such a smart scene. Love that way that plays out. So I wanted to shout out Lindsay Ellis's video essays she did on these films. And I believe it's her who makes the point that there are 3 endings to this film because each one like ends a particular series of events, like a particular plot line has its own ending. And so it's staggered in that way. She does a great job of explaining it. If it is the videos, it's been a while since I've seen them, but I'm pretty sure it's her, and I'm pretty sure it's those videos. So check those out. She's great in general. Follow her channel on YouTube.
Yeah, she is great. I mean, it makes sense. There's like 5 storylines in this movie. Like we go from one storyline, kind of one singular narrative in Fellowship to 2 or 3 in Two Towers to 5 in this story. I mean, it's a massive. In order to wrap it all up, it kind of makes sense to me. And I've never been a person to be like, oh, I wish that the Lord of the Rings was shorter. Like clearly, I want to watch the extended editions every time and like revel in every moment. While we're here talking about endings, I did want to mention that I found out that there's a lack of the Legolas Gimli ending in the extended cut of this movie, and apparently something was shot, and it was to have like a Galadriel voiceover epilogue, kind of detailing what happens here at the end with the Fellowship and everything. Mm-hmm. But I think that ended up being scrapped, and it clearly wasn't finished and put into any of the cuts of the movies. I
did like in the book Gimli goes with Legolas to the far shores. It was a nice way to end their story.
I mean, it's fitting because after they've explored the mines and the forest together, if they go off and take that one last, like, their friendship is really, really cool and interesting. It'd be kind of fun to get sort of a look at their viewpoint on the trilogy, like entirely from their viewpoint. Although we kind of get most of the details anyway, but sort of the inner monologue would be interesting. There's a few more things that I learned in my research that I feel like are of note. There's the moment when Frodo gets pierced by Shelob. Elijah Wood it was Alka-Seltzer in his mouth that's making it foam out like that.
Okay.
So that's something I always think about when he gets stabbed. I'm like, oh, the foam really, really sells that moment. A normal movie average, and this data could be from a little bit further, in the past. I'm not really sure, but this stat here says a normal movie averages about 200 visual effects shots. This movie had 1,488, so 1,488 special effects shots. So I'm sure that I know for a fact that their visual effects department was working like crazy. And another fun little cameo. I told you before there was like 10 units. When they were doing pickups, I believe there was like 10 different units working at the same time. And Peter Jackson was shooting something else and was monitoring this sort of pickup insert that they were doing of Sam's arm as he's about to fight Shelob, the arm that comes in with Sting when he's like revealed. It's like a gunslinger moment. Mm-hmm. And I guess Peter Jackson felt that the arm wasn't being placed incorrectly. Like Sean Astin wasn't there, someone else was just doing the insert. And so Peter Jackson jumped on his bike and rode across the lot to get to where they were shooting this other scene, donned the Sam garb, and that's actually his arm holding Sting as it enters frame at the beginning of the Shelob fight.
That's awesome.
So, pretty funny little moment. He's like, I guess he just felt they weren't doing it correctly, cool. But yeah. And then just another big one. This was all shot over the course of 4 years, starting in 1999. Principal photography ended at the kind of, I believe, the end of 2001 or maybe the beginning of 2002. And then they would do pickups for like 6 weeks at a time each year. And then they did a final group of pickups. And the last shot that they ever did was actually 3 weeks after the 2004 Academy Awards, where this movie won Best Picture. They actually were shooting a pickup shot after the movie had already won Best Picture, and Peter Jackson arranged to film one final shot of skulls on the floor in the tunnels of the Path of the Dead, which was included in the extended edition DVD. He thought it'd be funny. He thought it was funny to be doing filming on a movie that had already won Best Picture.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah,
and also it's funny because it goes back to the fact that we weren't going to talk about Path of the Dead anymore, but we are.
I don't know what you're talking about. Let's move on. So, we've come to the end here, man. The end of our journey, and there's only one thing left to do, and that's to figure out whether we like these movies or the books better, or we think they are better. But before we do that, first off, we recorded a bonus episode for our patrons about the Tolkien biopic that we just released. Had a lot of fun talking to you about that. Really interesting film. We were mixed on it, but we really got into things we loved and the things that we didn't like. Interesting conversation. I hope that you guys will check out. If you're curious about that, check out our Patreon. And I want to announce our next project, which is going to be another one that we have been looking forward to for a long time. We are going to do The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, and the iconic film featuring Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. I'm really looking forward to getting into that one next week. So make sure to stick around, check that out, subscribe, and follow this podcast.
All right, let's get to it. It's time to decide.
So which one of us is going first? That's the question. Trilogy as a whole, who's going first?
I'm willing to go first, but if you want to.
If you're willing, I will allow it.
So I think that this trilogy of films specifically came at a time when it came at the perfect time. So it came at the dawning of sort of the digital movement that we see in terms of special effects and everything like that. And it was at the perfect time to still sort of lean into the classic filmmaking camera techniques that people were using for 100 years. That's just speaking of the form. And then we come to sort of the structure of the movies. We have, as I talked about, the intercutting, I think improved a lot of the narrative. Really helps me to like stay engaged with each over time. And overall, just the craftsmanship and everything that went into this movie. As someone who loves film, like I can't deny how good J.R.R. Tolkien's book is and how amazing the story is in general and what it spawned and what it created. And, you know, clearly this wouldn't exist without it. But, you know, the way that this trilogy has affected me over time and, you know, as a kid and still to this day, how much I love it, I am definitely going to go with the movies. And I know that some people are going to be upset about that, but I think that there were very smart changes made. There were things that I think, you know, some people felt were just Peter Jackson being excessive and things like that, but he clearly loved the source material and was trying to do right by Tolkien. And he brought on amazing sketch artists who had been working on Lord of the Rings since like the 70s, like creating sort of vistas and things like that, like Alan Lee. Brought on Howard Shore for this amazing score that I'll listen to periodically just to listen to something amazing. Overall, I think it just encompasses a lot of what I think makes, like, even as a blockbuster, what makes, you know, film amazing. And like, I think there's so much art in this film that it's undeniable. And, you know, that's not to take away from how, you know, poetic and how game changing and sort of ground setting Tolkien was to fantasy, but I'm taking the movies. Okay, man.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, this is an agonizing choice to make. I am not someone who unreservedly loves either of these. I have things that I've been critical about, you know, on the movies, you know, listen back, and things I've been critical about the books. I fully recognize that Tolkien is the progenitor of this idea, of this story, and believe me, like, I give him tons of credit for that. And in fact, something that really struck me during this viewing was how, like, Tolkien created what is essentially a modern legend for, like, all of Western society. Like, it is the thing that celebrates the old ways in many ways. Like, right, it celebrates things that we don't believe anymore about you know, aristocracy and noble blood and all this stuff, and in many ways are outdated. Yet, like many legends and many myths in society, it's a way of preserving, like, the way that we used to think and the way that we used to view the world. And in many ways, that's what Lord of the Rings is. It came in a modern era, so it's not going to be considered a myth. It's now just a story. But if any fantasy piece has ever risen to that level, like, it's probably Lord of the Rings. And so much of that credit has to go to Tolkien, you know, for creating it. These movies are incredible, like we talked about, you know, everything you just said, you know, groundbreaking in cinema, and so many smart adaptation choices were made, modernizing it, bringing it to audiences today in a way that is digestible, and bold, and took chances and made these giant movies, right, when no one was doing that, especially not in blockbuster fantasies. I don't know, you know what I mean? This is why I'm torn, and it's very difficult for me to pick. Ultimately, I have to go with my heart. Like Aragorn told Gandalf, what does your heart tell you? And for me, it's the movies. I got to give it to the movies. The movies are a just a little bit. They're the better version of this story. And part of it is me being trapped in my modern moment for sure. But I feel like I have less criticisms of these films than I do the books. And I feel like they've aged, the films have aged better than the books have in some ways. So I got to give it to the movies, man. At the end of it all, we're in agreement that the Lord of the Rings films are the superior version. Although I do highly recommend reading the books. I think it's important for history. But yeah, we've come together and we're one voice in the end here. So I don't know. Were you expecting that? I feel like you were expecting me to pick the books.
I don't know. I think I leaned into you. I think I figured you were going to pick the movies because I felt like you would probably agree with a lot of the things that I was saying. But at the same time, I don't know. You could have easily gone for the historical context and value of the fact that...
I honestly didn't decide until like today. So this was a thing that I was on the fence about. So anyway,
I mean, people are going to be upset about it. People will be upset that's our answer. But... I mean, to each their own.
Well, and that's why I'm trying to give Tolkien his due. You know what I mean? Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But here we are, man. You know, at the end of 12 episodes on Lord of the Rings. We'll be back one day with The Hobbit and those movies, and it'll be a little dessert to finish this off. But this is the main event.
Yeah, and who knows what'll happen with that Amazon show at this point. A lot of stuff is up in the air in terms of things that are coming, but I'm sure it'll come out, and I'm sure we'll try to...
Speaking of Patreon, we are going to be covering Return of the King animated movie later this month, just for another little bit more Lord of the Rings. But that being said, 12 episodes in one IP is pretty astounding. We did It by Stephen King over the course of I think 8 episodes. We've done some other big projects, but this is I think the biggest one we've done, unless I'm mistaken. I'm pretty sure this is it, and it's coming to a close. It's been a blast. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it. Hopefully you checked out. If you're just dipping in for the movie episodes, do go back and listen to the book episodes if they interest you at all. We have a lot of fun talking about those books and getting into the differences. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have recording it. It's been wonderful. It's been one of the highlights of doing this podcast, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a joy. Thank you to everybody for listening. We really appreciate it. If you want to follow us on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those adding to film. And join the Council of Inklings, because that's where we post polls, we post news, any sort of adaptation, things that we see coming out. We sort of let the community know where we're at, like what we're thinking in terms of potential projects. And then it's a good way to just stay connected.
Absolutely. Like I said, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/inktofilm. See all of our bonus content, 23 and counting bonus episodes on there. A lot of interesting stuff, a lot of different things we've covered, so check that out. Oh, and speaking of Council of Inklings, we just posted today new images from the Dune adaptation coming with Denis Villeneuve. So there's lots of great adaptations on the horizon that we're absolutely looking forward to, that we're going to have a lot of fun with.
I cannot wait for that. I just, everything I see, every little nibble that I can get, I'll take, you know?
Oh, and if you liked this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review. It helps the podcast out so much, helps us get the word out, and, tell your friends. It'd be great. We appreciate it.
Thank you to Music Archive for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man, that's it. That's the end. We're back in the Shire. We're home.
And until next time.
Thanks for listening.